welcome to the VeriSM session. We will quickly jump into the discussion, but before we proceed, let us understand something. We have been regularly talking about VeriSM in the industry for quite some time now, and there are a lot of confusions, a lot of wrong notions at times that I come across. So it's very important for us to first understand what VeriSM is, how is this positioned. So one thing is clear, I'm sure all of you understand, that VeriSM is not a generic service management approach. It is a service management approach proposed for the digital era. VeriSM is positioned to be the service management model for the digital era. So now when we use this word digital, one thing is clear, that the positioning of VeriSM is not generic. It is not, even if you notice, we are time and again using the word service management model. We are not saying IT service management model. So again, another thing is clear, that VeriSM does not address IT service management as such. Rather, the focus area is the service management overall, which cuts across end-to-end enterprise and does not isolate or separately focus on a particular area like IT. So that's the starting point. We will move on. It is important to set the context. And when I say context, I mean, let's understand what digital is. And we keep on using this terminology called digital. And whenever we hear this term digital, there is a common notion in the industry. People think digital equals to technology, which we all hopefully understand. If not, we will give more details on why digital is not really technology. Digital is much more than that. And let us understand what it is, and let us understand how to position various service management topics in that. So moving on. Going to the next slide. Right, we will move on further. Right, so about digital. So as we keep saying that digital era and digital transformation, let's understand what digital transformation is and what it is not. So yeah. So as you see, a digital transformation context. So ultimately in today's world, what happens is digital is no more an option, right? It has become a part of life for all organizations, whether in a business to business mode or in a business to direct consumer mode. Everywhere, digital is creating, based on digital transformation concepts, organizations are providing disruptive solutions to the standard services that were once upon a time available. So if you see, the primary premise of digital environment is that today you can deliver and consume any service from anywhere. So you can deliver from sitting anywhere, you can consume again from anywhere else. Geographical proximity is no more a hindrance in terms of providing or consuming services. So it sounds very simple, but to be honest, it has radicalized our environment, right? Take examples like let's say Uber. Let's take example like these in Indian context, take example like Ola. Let's take Swiggy, food providers and all that. So everywhere, if you see, people are consolidating businesses. They are coming up with new technological ideas, which is radicalizing an environment. There was a very common question doing rounds in a fun quiz doing rounds a few months or few years back ago rather. People had been regularly asking that who is the biggest competitor to who is the biggest seller of digital cameras in the market. And the common answers used to be the traditional players like Sony and Nikon and Canon and so on. But then in today's context, if you notice, the fun answer is that it is actually Samsung and Apple's of the world, because they have integrated this camera concept in their mobile phones, which is ultimately taking Sony's of the world out of this digital camera business as such. So they are the biggest competitors. So the learning from this input that I'm giving is that in today's world, competition, if you have an organization and if you look at your competitors are no more the standard, you don't have any more standard competitors. So right. So if you notice that competition today is coming from various, various angles, and they are not the traditional competitors of yours. They can sweep away your business and things may change. So now before you get into, and today, if you don't improve digitally, you would be most probably hitting the, getting into the oblivion. People will start forgetting about you. It's very difficult to run today without having this. Even if you notice, now the fun of digital transformation is in today's world, even if you are a small organization, it is not a concern. So how much of financial capability you have, or how, your bigness as such, in terms of your resources, does not really make a great difference. What makes different is how mature or how progressive you are in terms of your digital aspects. A small company can compete against the biggest multinationals depending on various technological transformations or digital transformation as such. So we understand that digital has radically changed the landscape, and it is continually changing. It is about bringing in emerging tech, binding that with various business services that you offer to the consumer, and then bringing about change. So that's exciting. And with this, we will go a little more deep into digital transformation. So moving on. Right, so here is a nice diagram to give you a quick brief about when we use the word digital, what does it mean? Okay, so now let's take an example of our organization, Consultants Factory. So we do a lot of consulting as well as quite a bit of training in different topics for the global market. So now question is, when it comes to that kind of a service provider organization, which is depicted here as the big green box, we are reaching out to the consumer. Now the question is, what would qualify rather as digital transformation? Is it the external viewing solutions of ours which will directly impact the consumer, that is you? For example, we used to offer our solutions in a classroom basis. So if you wanted to attend this kind of a session from us, you had to come for a seminar in some physical location, and then we radicalize that or change that to a platform like Zoom, where we are directly communicating with you, and you are sitting at the comfort of your home and attending this session. So this is a small digital tweaking. Now through this, we are reaching out to you from anywhere to anywhere. So now the question is, does it mean that digital transformation is this, or is it more than that? So here, this diagram tells you that it is not only the external aspect. So digital transformation can be of two types, right? It could be an external view where you are reaching out to your consumer. So it's the consumer connection point. For example, Swiggy. Take an example, food. You have a mobile app, you open that, type in the request and send a request, and it hits Swiggy's environment. And that's the connection, that's the external layer of the digital transformation that you have. But then now think about it in the back end. Once Swiggy accepts the order, what happens in the back end? There might be loads of stuff, right? So the order goes through a supply chain or a supply network. It touches different groups or different, as in VeriSM, we call them capabilities. It touches various capability groups, moves around, and then ultimately the solution comes and gets delivered to you. And then post that, whatever amount you paid, there are multiple things to be done even after the service is delivered, much after. So whatever service you take from Swiggy, after the service is delivered to you, then post that, they need to consolidate their accounts, they need to ensure that the taxation is taken care of, they need to make sure that the people who are running, using their bikes and coming and delivering things to you, they have proper human resource management controls and so on. So there are loads of stuff that happens in the back end, even though you don't see it. Now, needless to tell you, for an organization to function in the digital era, it may not be enough to only have an externally beautiful looking interface like Swiggy. It is also important to have the internal processes streamlined, well established. The connection points need to be identified and bound, and then they should talk to each other. So that's the process layering that you do. Once that is done, you need to make sure that if you need to take the most advantage of digital, you need to also ensure that internal facing services are also going through a digital revolution. Unless you do that, just the front end would not deliver great results. Here I would quote an example long back, many years back, when Ola, as a cab service provider in India, we all know, they came to India just like Uber globally. So in India, the first entrant was Ola and not Uber. So they came in, and then they provided this kind of an app-based ordering of cab and so on. You could have seen the cab details, etc. You could have placed an order and stuffs like that. It all worked, right? I mean, for me, I had a personal experience. I used to use Ola service pretty frequently. I remember multiple cases where the ordering was fine and the acceptance also happened, but then post that, I don't know what happens in the back end. Ultimately, it gets cancelled, the driver doesn't come on time, and there is no follow-up and things like that. I used to get really upset. And if I have a business focus, maybe I have a business meeting to attend, and I'm waiting for the Ola to come and it doesn't show up on time, it becomes a massive issue for a business person like me. So now if you notice, it's not enough. Again, as I said, digital has two aspects, the external and the internal ones. When it comes to transformation, it's the complete chain that we talk about, the end-to-end aspects. So example of internal could be the financial technologies that are coming, various fintech tools as we call them, or technology layers, or martech, marketing and technology. So I mean, needless to tell you that digital marketing is a big famous concept now, SEO and SEM and so on. So it becomes pretty important. Human resource also can be radicalized through technology and so on and so forth. If you notice something here in the internal groups, if you see, there is something called enterprise IT. So guys, till date, you and I, all people who are attending this workshop, this webinar, I'm assuming that all of us come from an IT service background or IT related backgrounds. So if you notice, IT now in reality is just a part of this entire landscape. Your focus, it has always been that way. Our focus has never been to ensure that just the IT part of our services work fine. Our aim always has been that the entire, so our focus has always been to ensure that the entire organization put together, all these groups, so operations group, your business operations, your sales and marketing, your enterprise IT, and all other backbones like human resource, admin, accounts, legal, all of them work hand in hand and ultimately create a common centralized value that is delivered to the consumer. That's the idea. However, in order to do that, needless to mention, our focus has been the IT service aspect, so the enterprise IT. But I'm sure all of us understand, in today's world, if you want to continue in the continue in the service management space, it is not enough. Because of the advent of digital environment, it is not enough for you to stick or continue restricting yourself only to services which are coming from our enterprise IT. You need to spread out and look at the entire organization. There are multiple non-IT solutions are also being provided to the consumer. Your job, however, though they are non-IT, but ultimately they run on a backbone of various technology aspects. Technology is not the focus, it's the enabler. And here comes people like you and me. Our job would be to continue ensuring that not only IT services, but any other service like a human resource service or an operational service, any service for that matter, has the same qualities, the same processes. Like I'm sure many of us have gone through the IT service management basic learnings in the past. So whether it's ITIL or it's ISO 20K or CMMI for services, whatever you call it by, ultimately, if you see, the processes are pretty standard, right? For any service to be provided in the back end, you would require a lot of processes like incident management, change, release, configuration, and so on and so forth. Now, all these processes are applicable to all IT services, like for example, your email service or your network service. If there is a downtime in the network service, then naturally incident management kicks in and takes care and things like that. Similarly, whether it is an IT service like network or a human resource service like payroll, the same processes, incident, problem, change, has the same capability to kick in and try and help. So the understanding is, guys, though we keep calling IT service management, but over the years, slowly, all the models, all the frameworks has been talking about zooming out from IT and getting into the overall service management space. This is why if you look at the ISO 20000, the latest edition that came out in 2011, if you open that, it talks about SMS, service management system. It doesn't talk about IT service management system, right? It's service management. So the concepts are equally applicable to any non-IT environment. Same thing for CMMI for services. If you open up, you would see it's service management and not IT services. ITIL has always been very deep into IT services, but I have seen to my astonishment that ITIL can also be greatly used for any other non-IT services. So one thing is clear, that no framework or standard that you have learned need to be confined to the basics of only IT services. It can be spread out in the entire org and generated value as a group. When it comes to VeriSM, VeriSM talks about that. VeriSM zooms out and clearly announces that our focus is overall service, not IT. So now, coming back to our discussion, digital transformation is the basis on which VeriSM works fine. When it comes to digital transformation, think about it in two different aspects: the external factors, external services, or digital transformation, or internal transformation. Both are equally important. Moving on. Right. So here, this nice diagram, right? It shows, what does it show? If you notice, it shows that the starting points are different. That's the factor. So ultimately, there has been a common discussion I have been, subjected to for quite a few months in the recent past. People are asking that, what do you mean by digital transformation? Does it mean, for example, a simple, let's take an example of, let's say, a simple ERP. There is an organization, I can take an example, an organization in the Middle Eastern market. It's a government organization, small one. They have never gone into even a proper, well-established ERP system. This is the first time they realized, after they did an analysis of their environment, they realized it is important for them to get into an ERP journey, get the ERP system in place, of course, taking help from digital, and then post that, start going for further solutions which will enhance the experience more. So now if you see, implementation of ERP system has been a common practice for all organizations for years together, right? It's nothing new. So now, when it comes to this kind of a journey, which is way later than its time, it should have happened many years back, happening today. Now, can I consider this a digital journey? There are different groups of thought. I am a part of that group of thought who says that yes, it is still a digital journey. The starting point is much behind, and the target point is much behind. There are companies who are starting their journey today, highly mature, starting their journey at 80% maturity and trying to go to 100%, that kind of a journey. And then there are companies who are at 0 maybe, trying to reach 30. That's their target. Just because the starting points are different, and just because whatever you're trying to achieve, the timelines are different, doesn't mean that it's not digital. It is a digital journey. Now, question is, whether would you say that this is a very radicalized digital journey which requires high level of maturity? May not be. But ultimately, the starting points can be different. Any journey that you are taking through the help, where your aim is to improve your business landscape, you're trying to improve your business landscape, give better value to your consumer by taking help from various technological solutions, is considered as digital in my mind, right? So yes, it can be, if you see the goals are different. Then very important parameter, if you notice, there are lots of terminologies now. It's a terminology game floating around. What is digital? Some call it digital transformation, some call it disruption, some call it optimization, transformation, whatnot, innovation, and so on and so forth. So now, if you notice, all digital journey need not be innovative in nature. Innovation is an important parameter for digital journey, where your starting point is at a maturity level of pretty high rank, and you're trying to achieve something which is beyond beyond its time. Like an organization like Apple coming up with a new device, or coming up with the next level of networking and the mobile telephony and stuffs like that may have a lot of innovative aspects involved in it. Whereas an organization, the example that I gave, the government organization starting their journey and implementing an ERP system, may not have any innovation embedded in it. That does not disqualify it from being a digital journey. So now zoom out and ask yourself, when it comes to disruption. Am I disrupting through this journey? May not be. Disruption is when you change the rules of the game. You disrupt at the customer end. You come up with some solution which completely radicalizes your environment or your industry. For example, Uber radicalized the whole cab booking system environment. So that's a disruption. It changed the landscape. On the other side, it might be just an optimization. So today we are delivering our training using this kind of an interface, and we realize that we can tweak it, optimize it. There is no radicalized solution. There is no disruption as such, but we can enhance this experience a little further by bringing all of your videos also on the screen, by ensuring that you and I can interact over throughout this journey, and so on and so forth. Multiple things. I don't even know what can be done. But let's assume that there are loads of stuff which will give us benefit. You will be more benefited. That can be more of an optimization, just a notch improvement from what we are doing today, rather than a complete end-to-end disruption. So that is also a part of digital, right? And transformation, when it comes to, just understand, transformation is an end-to-end solution, guys. Transformation is a much bigger concept. You do not stick yourself to a portion of your digital journey. So you don't disrupt in one point. You ensure the entire supply chain end-to-end is digitized and managed in a much more optimized way. So there are different terms and so on and so forth, but ultimately one thing is for sure. The very reason we kept these slides is to make you think. Ask yourself, have you already not been subjected to various digital games? You have. Maybe some of you sitting here have gone through a disruptive approach from your organizations that you work for. Maybe in some other cases, there is no disruption as such, but you regularly optimize. You regularly come up with new tool sets. Your marketing goes through a sea change in tools. Your solutioning may go through sea change, and so your human resource management goes through a sea change, and so on and so forth. May have happened, but ultimately the point is whether disruption or optimization or a big picture transformation end to end, whatever it is, you do go through. You're subject to your environment, though you like it or not, you are already subjected to a digital world. Now, in this kind of world, the question is, how would service management help? You and I, hopefully, sitting in the session, are all wondering, or we already know maybe, that what is service management's role? We come from IT service background. We understand the incidents, problems, and changes of the world. How do we position our understanding to this world, the digital world, and how would VeriSM help? Does it mean that VeriSM is here so we don't need ITIL, we don't need ISOs or anymore, we don't need Agile and anything? Or is it that they all coexist? And if that is the case, then how are they mapped with each other? With that understanding, we'll move on. We'll go to the next slide. So as you see, service management in digital era. So guys, here, the same diagram that we drew, coming back. So if you see, this is a typical example of a consumer taking a set of services from this big blue box, which is the service provider organization. This service that the consumer is taking could be an IT service. For example, let's take this green big box of service provider. If I may consider that that box represents an IT organization for IT service provider, managed service. For example, IBM, let's say. So if IBM's managed service is what the consumer is consuming, then this big box becomes that IT service that is being offered. But it doesn't change anyways, anything in between, because to provide this IT service to the consumer, in the back end, we need to have sales and marketing. We need to have the same HR or admin operations. We need to have an internal IT team, which will help us with the laptops, desktops, and our internal network and so on, because otherwise we can't front end and offer the services to the consumer, and accounts and finance, of course. So if you see, it could be an IT example. In that case, take an example like company like IBM. In their case, question is, when you are providing a service to your consumer, you have so much dependency on the internal teams like HR. They need to provide backfill whenever you lose an employee through to attrition or something. Then you need to immediately hire somebody else, backfill, or maybe bring somebody from some other division and put that back in. HR job, right? So unless the HR team is well tuned and understands these requirements, you are in deep soup. So HR processes or HR services should be optimized, and that can be the timelines, the efficiency, the effectiveness of these services can be enhanced. When it comes to admin, a new client coming in, you need to ensure your facility, maybe this, because of this new client, you are getting 20 seater business, 20 FTE. So now where would you reside them? Maybe the client needs an isolated, ring fenced environment for their network. Where would you establish that? So you are dependent now on admin. So if you see, in today's world, dependency is a common factor. You are dependent, whether you like it or not, on various internal groups. Unless you ensure that you effectively control these dependencies, internal and external, your service value will never be generated. Your consumer would never see value. Sadly enough, in today's world, you and I know what happens is none of these controls are that robust. You go to your internal HR team and tell them that you need an employee to be joining in a month's time. They say cannot be done. It will take 4 months, and you are in deep soup. You know that if I go to your HR and ask them how satisfied are they, or do they even understand what is their contribution? Yeah. So do you understand what is your contribution to this whole service? Most probably people don't. So that's a big risk. It's a big concern. We all understand that. These are big risky factors, and in order to make sure that our service has right quality of value, we need to ensure that all these interdependencies are identified, they understand each other, and they do not restrict themselves only to their area. So HR should never come to you and say, okay, I have done my job, now don't question me. Or operations or admin, nobody just finishes their portion of work and say, don't come and blame me. On the other side, the front-ending groups to the consumer, they don't also come and say, I could not do it because HR did not deliver on time, or I could not do it because enterprise IT was not efficient enough. The culture of blame game need to go down. Every group should take ownership of their own deliverables. They should understand the big picture as to where they're contributing. And then these connections should be well bound, so that ultimately what you deliver to the consumer is not just an output. You don't restrict yourself to outputs. You get into the world of outcome. The consumer is taking your service for a reason. You need to fulfill that reason. You cannot just say, I have done my job, so now don't come and do a blame game. We need to come out of that culture of fear, and we need to get into a fearless environment where we take risks, we jump in and support each other. Now, all these that I told you has always been the standard practice in any service management environment. But today, it is especially important from a digital environment, because for the consumer experience, CX, or user experience, UX, has become a very, very premium important factor. And the options they have are galore. If not IBM, somebody else. If not that, somebody else again. So what we understand, it's a big risky environment. Competition is very fierce. You need to do much better than anybody else. And service management can make the complete change. Service management can be the differentiator between you and your competitor, right? So that's where service management fits in. Service management tells digital that do not make this a catch-up game of how much technology I can fit into myself. If you do not need this technology, you don't take it. So you always start from the consumer, understand the consumer's needs, translate that back into your processes, look at your process culture, and then identify if there are further digital fitment that can happen through which you generate much better value for the consumer. So it's an outside in approach, whereas for a standard digital approach, it is inside out. This is a very crucial point, guys, for VeriSM. When you are getting into VeriSM practice, you need to make sure that it is not an inside out approach, but outside in. And VeriSM or any other service management talks about that. It says that you and I can create that. We can make it consumer centric and not a random IT journey. Happened with me many a times where I ask my client, why are you implementing big data? And their answers are typically inside out. They say, if I implement big data, I can identify various consumer trends, and I can identify better solutions. I can sell more and things like that. Everything inside out. Nobody tells me that the consumer experience is something that we had measured. We had understood that the consumer experience is low, and that is impacting my business revenue, etc. So now is the time when I decided that how can I improve this? And then I came out with this idea that, okay, big data might be a good fit. Nobody starts from the consumer, then brings it down to big data. Everybody decides that first, that big data is great to bring in. How do I do it? And in order to do it, what are the benefits can I reap? And then this thing. So it's an inside out approach. Service management can change that game the other way around. That's where you and I come. We are more of evangelists today rather than just a process guy. So that's about it. It has also, our focus has completely changed from IT to non-IT to overall organization. We will move on. So if you see, our focus was on IT services, IT service management. Now, if you see, it was good to understand IT processes or practices. Now, this is a fun thing. We were into IT services, but most of us were not very deep into IT processes as such. We never really understood how a network works. We never understood how, storage works, how they talk to each other. Technology landscape was not our thing, many a cases. Our thing was to understand how IT service management processes and culture can be built on top of it, and the experience can be enhanced. So if you see, our penetration into IT environment was not at the IT layer. Our penetration was in IT environment, the management layer. So now, so what is changing, guys, with this change? We will move a step. So if you see, now we are zooming out. We are saying our focus is no more IT. Our focus is overall enterprise service management, ESM as we call. So when it comes to enterprise service management, the focus is not IT, but overall services, the overall service outcome. Now, if you notice here also, many like you and me, many people think that do I need to now understand the business processes and business culture? Like, for example, do I need to understand how payroll works? Or do I need to understand how banking industry works? Do I need to understand in banking, various like mortgage is a process? Do I need to learn that in order to do service management and not IT service management? Wrong, guys. It's again the same story when it comes to IT. It is great to know all these. It is great to understand how payroll works. It's great to understand how mortgage works. But let's assume you do not. Will you not be able to run your own service management processes, the standard incident problem change? You can. It's the same story. So whatever the service is, does not matter. If I may just quickly draw here. So incident management, change management, problem management, these are the processes, right? And on this side, you have the services. Let's say network service. Let's say payroll service. Let's say mortgage service. Now, these are the services that you are providing. And in order to provide these services, if something goes wrong in network, once upon a time, what will happen? You will kick in incident management. You need a major change in networking. How would you do that? You will bring in change management and so on and so forth. Same processes will be equally applicable for payroll. If something goes wrong in payroll system as such, the overall process, what would you do? You will bring in an incident management process, whose scope is not only IT, but also non-IT. So end to end. So if you see, when it comes to you and me, nothing changes greatly. We are not going to change big time in terms of our learning. Our learnings are great. All we need to do is now change our thought process and position the whole thing coming out of IT and getting into overall enterprise services. That's the beauty. So is it possible? Doable, very much. VeriSM is a concept, is a training that teaches you to change this thought process. VeriSM does not teach you incident change problem. You already know that. Incident, ITIL, ISO 20, everybody has told you the same thing. So you know these processes. There is no need to redefine them just because your focus is no more only IT. Whether IT, non-IT, processes remain the same. But the thought process, the culture, the positioning changes. Moving on. Right, so how does service management help? In summary, in a digital era, it brings context. So what does it mean? It means it does not allow you to radically jump into any technology. It's a common practice, right? Technology is loved by technology people. Everybody wants to go out in the market, all CIOs and CTOs, they want to go out in the market and proudly say, we are implementing big data. We are implementing, mobility and things like that. But please note, this is not the approach. So what service management people like you and me would do is we will create a cascade, right? We will first identify why do we need, if we need something. We will identify what is the consumer need. How does it translate into our organizational processes? And then in order to run those processes fine, what kind of technology layer do we need? And accordingly identify what technology layers can be picked. Now point, it's easy for me to say, but I'm sure you have noted that it's not easy for a process person like you and me to just define the whole chain by ourselves. Of course not, guys. So we are not even expecting that. So the idea is that service management folks will champion this concept. They will mobilize, they will coordinate among different groups, bring them together, but ensure that this flow is maintained so that your entire digital journey becomes outside in. That's the cultural change. So what would they do? They would coordinate intelligence to decide which emerging technology to exploit, when, where, and why. So remember, don't try to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. Start from the consumer and roll back instead of starting from something inside out. VeriSM is the learning which creates this kind of structuring in your mind. It will only help you understand the same concept. So concept, process, etc. wise, the nuts and bolts do not change. It remains the same. All you need to do is take them and position them in a different new context. That's what service management does. Moving on. Good. So the impact of digital transformation on service management. So if you see, there are three things it takes care of. The first one click, please. Right. So value. Our aim is to deliver value to our consumer. Question is, how do we deliver value in a digital era where maybe adoption or adaptation of certain digital practices would give the much sought after value that the consumer was looking for? So maybe that's a great idea. So service management would make us think. Moving on. Right. So if you see supply chain, it's not enough for us to decide the value. In order to generate that value, we need to ensure internally we are hugely dependent. In a digital environment, guys, think about it. In today's world, many systems and applications, etc., are taken by you on rent, maybe on cloud or something. You are not even using. Many technology pieces are brought in by various vendors. Dependencies run amok. You are dependent not only on internal teams, you are also dependent on loads of external vendors and so on. In that kind of a hugely dependent environment, if you want to maintain, you need to maintain the relations, the controls, the handshakes. So the supply chain becomes very crucial. And who can manage this? Service management. What could be the typical practices like SIAM, SIAM? You must have heard. SIAM can help immensely by creating these supply chain connections and making sure they are managed for a digital era. Works great. Moving on, and that's not also enough. So there is a third piece called contribution of individual capabilities. So every group that you see. So how do you deliver value? For that, you need to know what does the consumer think as value, and then translate that into your objectives or your organizational outcomes. Once that is done, you need to then identify what is the supply chain like, right? You need to understand what are the handshakes we have, where are the things that are dropping, like HR, admin, do we have a handshake arranged? Then once that is done, third thing is for you to also study every group. So HR services, admin services, you need to identify those services, see how that is laid out, identify and make sure that you contribute to create a situation where they are participating in the overall output and not, overall outcome and not only the output. So these are three dependencies that you have on service management, and that's where people like you and me will do great. Continuing. Right, so now we have completed the context. We know why it is required, where is it positioned, and now we will see a quick glimpse of VeriSM, what it is. We'll move on. Right, so VeriSM is actually, guys, don't know how many of you knew, it's an acronym. The full form, difficult to remember in the initial days, but it's standard. So VeriSM is defined as a service management model. And this model is value driven, so it stands for V. It is focusing on value and nothing else. It's evolving. So it says that you don't need to stick to one practice forever. It will continually evolve for like any other good practice. It is responsive. So it responds, it allows you to tweak and tailor and modify for every small piece for organizational change. It is integrated. So it creates an integrated culture. So guys, VeriSM, just to tell you, is like an umbrella. Just like COBIT, you must have heard of COBIT. COBIT is an umbrella. Similarly, VeriSM is a umbrella. They are at different positions. So I'm not discussing COBIT today. But all I'm saying is VeriSM is an umbrella of service management under which will reside multiple practices like ITIL, CMMI, ISO, cloud, this, that, anything that you pick up. So they all put together becomes an integrated setup, and that is VeriSM. So what is VeriSM? It's a value-driven, evolving, responsive, and integrated service management setup, a service management model. Right, so that's VeriSM. Quick introduction about it. So VeriSM says certain radical thought processes, you need to understand them first before you get if you don't need to you should not take them into the the way it is written only. You need to understand the logic behind it. So VeriSM says everything is a service. That means it does not differentiate greatly between service and product. It says that does not mean the service and product are just the same. Service or product, in today's digital era, you are consuming everything through a digital environment. Think about it. Digital environment has created a very complex culture, complex environment, but you don't need to understand that complexity to enjoy it. So for example, big data, how does it work? You don't need to understand the inner workings of it. You can just take a ready-made big data solution, plug and play, start using. And there is a vendor who is taking care of the back end and everything. You just pay them and enjoy the benefits. So today, technology has become very complex, agreed. But the good thing is, even after the complexity, it is not visible to you and me. We can just buy and use. So all it is saying is whether it's a product or a service, ultimately, culturally, it does not make a great difference. Rather, you should focus on generating value, which is the aim of both. Whether a product or a service, the aim is to generate value, focus on value. So everything is a service according to their understanding. Outcome versus output, as we discussed, zoom out of output, get into outcome. These are the cultural thought changes that it proposes. And it also proposes organization to be an end-to-end service provider rather than focusing on individual groups. So these are three major cultural shifts that you need to understand going forward. Moving on to the next slide. Yeah. So VeriSM model, this is a one slide summary. So I keep on saying, if you look at the top, if you see the slide is divided in two parts. On one side, you see the top and front view of VeriSM on the VeriSM model. On the other side, you see the mesh building method. What is mesh? I'll come to that. So first, look at the top view of VeriSM. If you see, it shows that there are three concentric circles. There is an outer layer called governance. There is a slightly inner layer called service management principles. And then there is a core. That core is called management mesh. Now guys, this core, this management mesh is the beauty that VeriSM proposes. This is something that attracts me the most towards VeriSM compared to others. I mean, everybody talks about governance and service management principles, but the mesh, the nicely designed mesh is amazing. So I like that. I would explain that. Now, if you see on top of that, there are a few line items. So there is a consumer intervention and the end also consumer. So it says, VeriSM says that we start our culture and we end our culture with consumers. Consumers give you requirement. You process that internally in your IT or in your service provider organization, and then you provide the output to again consumer, and then it comes back as a feedback and starts. So it's a closed loop circle where the consumer starts the whole initiative and closes on a regular basis. But if you see below that, on the surface level, so if you see now, look at the front view of this, it is actually VeriSM model is created in two layers, guys. The lower layer has only three concentric circles, which is shown here. And the upper layer has these four steps. If you see, these steps are called define, produce, provide, and respond. These are four steps of service management according to VeriSM. So it says it is typically a life cycle approach like what we have learned in concepts like ITIL. We'll come back. ITIL, for example, says, right, that first you strategize, then you you design, then you transition things, and then you make services go live. After that, you maintain it, operational aspects, and then at the end, you do a continual improvement, which engulfs the whole circle. 5 stages. Likewise, when it comes to VeriSM, it talks about 4 steps. They're very similar. So define is nothing but the same design kind of a concept. So you define your services here, and then you produce your service accordingly. That means transition kind of a concept, make it go live. Once it goes live, then your service is live, you need to regularly provide it. So maintenance, regular protection of the service, so that the service does not get, attacked by various risks of your environment, security or otherwise. And then at times, whenever whenever the users or other people are the consumers are interacting with you to take help, or something has gone wrong, to troubleshoot and things like that, you respond, typically like operations. So these are the 4 steps: define, produce, provide, and respond. They are on the upper layer. This upper layer regularly keeps on, it's very operational, the upper layer. The reason being that for every requirement of the customer, you go through this cycle. This is on the top, but this overall top is based on a basic logic on the base layer. That base layer, guys, is called as these 3 concentric meshes. You design that in a while, maybe quarterly, maybe half yearly, maybe annual, depends on your cultural practices. So ultimately, the management mesh is the core. Now let me see what happens. So the base, when you are establishing, it starts with the governance layer. You establish the governance practices of your organization, and that culture is established by your top management and board. Once that culture is established, based on that, you define that for our organization, what are the service management principles that we will follow on a regular basis. These are like a guardrail. It stops you from doing things that are not acceptable at your cultural level. Yeah. So guardrails are very important. For example, a customer or a consumer requests from you something that you cannot do based on your cultural practices or your principles. So naturally, you need to say no. Unless you do that, you are open to a lot of risks and cultural shocks. So that's where the service management ring comes in. So the outer layer is governance, then service management principles, and at the core is something called management mesh. If you see on the right hand side, it says building the mesh. So how do you build the mesh? First, you define your governance and service management principles. Once they are defined at a top level, you create a strategic plan, the top level plan to follow throughout the year or throughout the quarter and so on, periodicity. Now, based on that, you define your management mesh. This management mesh may go through various cultural changes. What is that? I'll explain. Now, once the management mesh is defined, based on that, you create your tactical plans and your operational plans. So this is these are the steps that you go through. Now we will go to the next slide to give you a little more understanding. So here comes the management mesh details. This slide is very crucial for you and me to look at. The reason being, this will give you much better clarity as to where VeriSM fits in with all other all other management practices. So if you see, the management mesh talks about 4 different types of strands. They join together, creates a mesh. From the left to right comes a set of environmental practices. So VeriSM says that if you want to practice service management in your environment, you would be heavily dependent on your business environment or your overall organizational environment. Many people may know that when we say environment, we mean the macro environment and micro environment to do your business. So for example, what is your political scenario under which you are doing your business or delivering your services? What are the cultural practices? What are the for example, here some examples given, like what are the legislation that you go through? What are the legal? So there is a common term called PESTEL, right? PESTEL. Political, environmental, social. These are different aspects that are applicable on your business. When you define your environment, that okay, this is the environment I do business in, accordingly there are a lot of decisions on your business processes as well as your management practices come out. Let me take an example. Let's say you do business with European companies. So there is a legislative requirement for you to adhere to a new concept called GDPR, right? A data security concept. So once GDPR kicks in, naturally from the management practices, if you see here, from management practices, there is one strand of GDPR that you need to put in your practices. Unless you do that, you won't be able to comply to the requirements of GDPR. So that's how environmental understanding, PESTL, PESTEL, etc. are required. On the other side, you also need to set your resources. What resources do you have? That means how much of budget do you have? What kind of people do you have? And so on. Those are important for you to decide what you can do. So define. So take a piece of pen and paper, draw these environmental lines, understand for every item what is the dependencies you have. Now based on that, create your resource current state. Understand that this is my current state of resources. Now based on that, decide what emerging tech do you want to get into, and whatever emerging tech you choose, accordingly, based on these three decisions, management practices will kick in. So maybe to control this environment, you would realize that I need the best practice of ITIL, or I need best practices of ISO 20, or maybe CMMI for services, etc. So or maybe Agile, or maybe SIAM. So once you understand these, you plug that in. When you put all these four together, guys, this becomes a mesh. Now, if you see, you change one side, the other sides change. It's very responsive. They're connected with each other. And between you and me, to be honest, the biggest, it's very difficult also to create. We have tried doing for a few clients. What we realize is, being a service management professional, you and I may not have the complete visibility of the environment right now. So we need a lot of communication with the right decision makers, bring them on the same table, coordinate the whole scenario, and ultimately come up with this list. So if you see, VeriSM is not separately proposing any activities in this management layer. They are rather saying that we are the umbrella. We have told you to create the governance layer and the service management layer. Accordingly, we have told you to create this mesh. That's where my job ends, VeriSM's job ends. Now, when you're creating this mesh, VeriSM also is giving you guidance ki what are the 4 areas that you can look at. But then when it comes to management practices, which exact processes should we choose? Which exact practices should we choose to get the right results? That is where your understanding of various processes and various standards will come in handy. That is where you can implement anything. There is no restriction. You can bring in ITIL, COVID, CMMI, just name it. So if you see, there is no clash between VeriSM and these concepts. These concepts come in and become integrated under the umbrella of VeriSM. That's the understanding, and yeah, that's about it. That's the management mesh.